Consciousness existed before your body formed and will continue after it dissolves. Right now it operates through your body while remaining completely untouched by anything that happens to it. The body ages, gets sick, eventually dies. Consciousness observes all of this without aging, without illness, without death. When you identify as the body, consciousness falls into an illusion that it shares the body's vulnerability. Something imperishable suddenly believes it's mortal. Something infinite suddenly believes it's limited. Something that was never born suddenly believes it will die. This belief that you are the body creates the person. The person lives in constant insecurity, always trying to secure happiness before time runs out, always accumulating experiences and possessions to fill a void that can't be filled. The person believes, I am this body and you are that body, we are fundamentally separate, resources are scarce, I must compete, I must defend, I must prove myself. Every conflict, every fear, every desperate grasping comes from this single mistaken identity. You came into this world as pure consciousness. Somewhere in early childhood, that consciousness looked at a body and thought, this is me. The moment that identification happened, consciousness restricted itself into a narrow bandwidth of perception. The vast river of awareness suddenly channeled itself into a single stream called, my life, my problems, my story. The person exists as a psychological construct, a collection of memories, beliefs, preferences, and conditioning that consciousness mistakes for its true nature. When you say, I am anxious, consciousness has identified with the anxiety. When you say, I am successful, consciousness has identified with an achievement. When you say, I am getting older, consciousness has identified with time. None of these describe what you actually are. They describe temporary conditions that consciousness is currently experiencing. This awareness illuminates everything, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, but remains untouched by any of it. A movie screen displays every scene without being affected by what's shown. The screen doesn't become violent during action scenes, doesn't become romantic during love scenes, doesn't die when characters die. Consciousness functions exactly this way with your entire life experience. Every spiritual path that focuses on purifying the mind, improving the person, gradually accumulating virtue over decades misses something fundamental. You're trying to clean a mask, perfect a costume, make the character you're playing into an enlightened character. But the character will never become enlightened because the character is exactly what blocks the recognition of what you already are. Consciousness doesn't need improvement. The imperishable doesn't need protection, the infinite doesn't need expansion. Only the person needs these things because the person is always incomplete, always vulnerable, always temporary. When you try to become more spiritual, more awakened, more present, you're reinforcing the person, adding another layer to the mask, creating a spiritual ego that's even more subtle and harder to see through than the regular ego. The recognition that you are consciousness, not the person, happens through subtraction. You don't add anything to what you are, you just remove the false beliefs that obscure what you've always been. Every concept about yourself, every story about your past, every projection about your future, these are all veils covering the simple presence that exists right now, before thought arises, before identity forms. Your true nature doesn't come and go. It never started, never stops, never changes. Thoughts come and go, emotions come and go, experiences come and go. The awareness in which all of this appears remains constant. When you were 5 years old, there was awareness. When you're 90, there will be awareness. The content changes completely, but the awareness stays exactly the same. When consciousness believes it is the body, several consequences follow. Time becomes threatening because the body ages and dies. Other bodies become competitors because resources seem limited. Experience becomes desperate because you must extract maximum pleasure before it ends. Security becomes impossible because everything the body depends on is unstable. Every moment carries an undercurrent of fear because something imperishable has hypnotized itself into believing it's fragile. The world you see is colored entirely by this misidentification. You don't see reality directly. You see it through the filter of personhood. When you meet another human, you don't encounter consciousness meeting consciousness. You encounter my personality meeting their personality, my story meeting their story, my needs meeting their needs. Every interaction becomes transactional because persons are always incomplete and always seeking completion through external means. Watch how the person operates. It wakes up carrying yesterday's identity into today. It moves through the world rehearsing conversations, planning interactions, managing its image, defending its positions. It treats every situation as something happening to me, every event as affecting my life, every outcome as either supporting or threatening my security. The person cannot rest because it exists only through constant self-maintenance. This identification runs so deep that even listening to these words, the person tries to appropriate the teaching. I need to remember this, I should practice this, this will help me become more present. But these responses come from the person trying to improve itself. The person cannot understand consciousness because the person is a construct within consciousness, not the other way around. What you are cannot be understood by thought because thought is an object arising in what you are. The mind cannot grasp its own source. This is why direct recognition matters more than intellectual understanding. You can study consciousness for decades without recognizing yourself as consciousness. The study happens in the mind. The recognition happens before mind, where you already exist as the awareness that makes mind possible. You don't need to purify yourself for years before discovering your true nature. You don't need to accumulate spiritual experiences before recognizing what's present right now. You don't need to become worthy of consciousness because you already are consciousness. You've never been anything else. You couldn't be anything else even if you tried. Consciousness playing the role of a person is like an actor forgetting their acting, becoming convinced they actually are the character, believing the character's problems are real, the character's past is their history. The play continues. The actor remains convinced they're the character and suffers accordingly. When the actor remembers, I'm not this character, I'm playing this character, everything changes while nothing changes. The play continues, the character continues, but the suffering ends because the identification breaks. Your body will continue to exist after this recognition. Your personality will continue to express its unique characteristics. Your life circumstances will continue to unfold. But you will know yourself as the consciousness that witnesses all of this rather than the person who is defined by it. The body ages, but consciousness doesn't age. The personality has preferences, but consciousness has space for all preferences. The life situation changes constantly, while consciousness remains unchanged. When you stop identifying as the person, you become no thing. No thing means you're not a thing, not an object, not a form, but the formless awareness in which all things appear. This formless awareness is your actual nature. It has no age because it's timeless. It has no problems because problems only exist for persons, for forms, for temporary constructs that believe they're vulnerable. The person lives in constant comparison, constant judgment, constant evaluation. Am I doing this right? Is this experience better than that experience? Am I progressing? These questions only make sense if you believe you're a person on a journey. When you recognize yourself as consciousness, there's no journey because consciousness isn't going anywhere. There's nowhere to go because consciousness is already everywhere. This recognition reveals what every being fundamentally is beneath the layers of conditioning. Every human, every animal, every form is consciousness temporarily identifying with that form, consciousness experiencing itself through that particular perspective. The difference between someone who recognizes this and someone who doesn't is only a difference in what they believe they are. The fall from grace is simply consciousness forgetting what it is and believing it's a form. This creates suffering because something unlimited suddenly experiences itself as limited, something eternal suddenly fears death, something complete suddenly feels lacking. All human suffering traces back to this single misidentification. When you walk through the world identified as a person, you unconsciously broadcast, "I am a person," to everyone you meet. This signal ensures others treat you as a person, creating a feedback loop that reinforces the identity. The entire human world operates as 8 billion persons confirming each other's illusion, all agreeing that personhood is real. As you recognize your true nature, something shifts. You stop requiring people to treat you a certain way. You stop needing validation, agreement, or acknowledgement. Someone can call you a fool and something inside remains undisturbed because you know what you are. What you are cannot be insulted, cannot be diminished, cannot be threatened by words or actions. When you're grounded in your own being, comfortable in what you are, people sense this and feel comfortable with you even when you express unconventional truths. They might find it interesting or strange, but something in them recognizes authenticity. When you and what you say are the same, nobody argues with you. People argue with pretense, with positions, with ideology, but they don't argue with truth because truth has a quality that disarms resistance. You might fool people temporarily, but the dissonance between what you claim and what you are creates suffering. If you're only following this channel, you're missing the other half of what I create. Patreon has become home to some of my most thoughtful work, and there's already a substantial library waiting for you there. The link is below if you'd like to join us. Life sometimes throws you into situations where people treat you entirely as a person because that's all they know how to perceive. You don't need to correct them, announce your realization, or demonstrate spirituality. You simply move in your own natural way, and whatever the moment requires arises spontaneously, appropriately, without rehearsal. This is real freedom, moving into any situation unprepared because you don't need to prepare to be what you are. Not unprepared like showing up to a job interview without knowing what the job is, but unprepared in the sense that your responses arise fresh from presence rather than from memory, from rehearsed scripts, from learned behaviors. Living without fundamental expectations of how things should be creates immense space. When you don't have a blueprint of, "this is how reality should look," you become almost unshockable. Events happen, people behave in ways you didn't anticipate, circumstances shift unpredictably, and something inside remains spacious because the button of "should" has switched off. Your innermost being yearns for this freedom, for life beyond conditioning, beyond control, beyond the prison of personhood. You are life itself, not just living life. You are the life that existed before the universe formed, the life that continuously brings forth new forms, the life that will continue after every form dissolves. When you look at a bird flying, you can perceive it through utility. It's flying to find food, find a mate, escape predators. Or you can perceive the aliveness itself, the energy that moves through the bird, the joy of flight that exists beyond any purpose. Eagles circle high for 15 minutes without moving their wings, riding currents with total effortlessness. They're experiencing the joy of being consciousness in the form of an eagle, experiencing the universe from that particular vantage point. You can access that same joy. This is the joy of consciousness itself, the joy that underlies all sense perceptions. When you recognize yourself as the presence that makes all perception possible, a deeper enjoyment emerges. You still perceive through your senses, still interact with the world, but beneath all experience there's the fundamental joy of conscious existence itself. This presence is what you are before personhood arises, before thoughts label experience, before the mind categorizes and judges. When you sense this presence, you're becoming conscious of your own consciousness. This is the deeper happiness that doesn't depend on circumstances, the aliveness that doesn't fluctuate with fortune. Most people associate happiness with things happening. I'm happy because something good occurred. Tomorrow something bad happens and they're unhappy. This happiness depends entirely on external conditions. But the happiness of recognizing your true nature is unconditional because what you are never changes, never comes or goes, never depends on anything. To be the presence more than the person means you stop living primarily as the accumulated past, the bundle of memories and conditioning that defines the character. The person will occasionally reassert itself. You'll get immersed in your life situation, especially when you check emails or social media and clutter enters the mind again. You might feel withdrawal symptoms, like craving another fix, another email, another update. But you can let this go, return to presence, return to what you are beneath the noise. This doesn't require years of practice because presence is not something you achieve. It's what you are right now before achievement becomes relevant. The beginner's mind is the enlightened mind because it's empty of accumulation, empty of the weight of knowing, empty of the person's entire library of concepts. Your mind has been filled by life. It cannot not have been filled. But you don't need to identify with all that content. You don't need to confuse the accumulated information with who you are. You can be a beginner again in the state of emptiness, which is simultaneously a state of fullness because when the content of mind falls away, the vastness of consciousness reveals itself. When you listen to teachings from this place of presence, understanding happens directly. When you listen as a person, as accumulated knowledge trying to add more knowledge, the teaching makes no sense. The person wants to understand, categorize, memorize, apply. But truth is not understood through mental effort. It's recognized through direct seeing that happens before mind translates experience into concepts. To define yourself is to confine yourself. Every label you apply, every identity you adopt, every story you tell about yourself creates boundaries around what is actually boundless. Nothing is greater than emptiness because in emptiness, allness exists. When you're empty of self-definition, you move fluidly through any situation, relate authentically with anyone, respond freshly to each moment without the prison of a fixed identity dictating your behavior. You are the one life that manifests as the universe. You are the consciousness that underlies all form. You are what was there before the Big Bang, what will be there after every universe dissolves, what is here right now experiencing itself through this particular body-mind.